You know, a lot of people coming into this season were really worried and wondering if Star Trek Picard could capture that next generation Star Trekian magic. And all I have to say is, they did a handsome lady starship porn scene, so 10 out of 10, no notes, they nailed it. Hello interwebs, I hope you are all doing well, and you freaking better be, because I am so freaking excited. My Trekkie heart is like literally beating with joy right now because I am so pumped to talk about the season 3 premiere and the final, supposedly, season premiere of Star Trek Picard. This episode titled, very fittingly, The Next Generation. And I say fittingly because this season is aiming to be a continuation of not only The Next Generation in terms of the characters that we get to see and the kind of style of storytelling, but also the sort of Next Generation era of Star Trek. And I just have to say right off the bat before we get into any specifics, for me, in this episode, I think they nailed it. We'll talk about it more in just a second, but I am very pleased with the direction of this episode, especially coming off of the, let's just say, disappointment of seasons 1 and 2 of Star Trek Picard. This season premiere, while certainly I'm reticent because Star Trek Picard has done me dirty before, this season premiere has me very excited so far. So we're going to get into it in just a moment, but before I get to all my excited feelings, I just want to let everyone know, normally I do a sort of spoiler-free section before my reviews of each and every episode, and I will continue that starting with the next episode of the season, with episode 2. But currently, my plan is, I have not seen all the episodes of the season yet, but I was given the first 6 episodes of the show, and I'm able to review all of them at a certain date that will be before this episode releases. So I will put up there, if you want my spoiler-free thoughts on the season that I've seen so far, like no spoilers, no worries about like getting spoiled anything further on, that video I'll be recording later, but should already be up for all of you. So if you want my spoiler-free thoughts, go check out that video, because we're going to discuss full spoilers on this episode. And like I said, we're going to get into it right now. This was great. Right from the opening shot of the episode, where we got to see it somewhere in the 25th century, I knew it was like, okay, this show is aiming in this season to completely change the tone of the show. Like I said, and I won't go into it because I talked about it in that other video, had frustrating feelings on seasons 1 and 2 of Picard. But with that opening, where it was very much evoking the opening of The Wrath of Khan, where that movie said somewhere in the 23rd century. It's very much this season is trying to evoke the very like Star Trekian nautical feel, and I really loved that this episode captured the feeling in some of the visuals and pacing and look of those original series movies, the ones like Kirk and Shatner and Leonard Nimoy and all of them, the sort of like that weighty nautical filmic feel, but then also felt Next Generation in some of the humor and tone and playfulness of the characters that we get to see, especially between Picard and Riker, but also still felt very Star Trek Picard in the best ways, that it still had that sort of modern sheen and feel to some of the look and sleekness and sort of the pace of the show. So it was just a great merging of all the best elements of those 3 things. Right off the bat, they show you that, and I thought it was just so very exciting to just watch all of that. But with that said, let's just start breaking this down. I'm going to go through the episode beat by beat as I normally do, because we have so much to talk about, and I am very excited, and I am hesitant in my excitement because, again, Star Trek Picard has burned me before, but clearly Terry Matalas, who has sort of taken over the reins of the show, is heading in a new direction this season, so very pumped and hopeful. Not giving it a pass. I'm hopeful. Star Trek is all about hope. Like I already said, the episode opens up with in the 25th century, very much evoking Wrath of Khan in that sort of like note there. Then we get this Fallout 3 song. I know the song predates Fallout 3. It's an older song, but I don't want to set the world on... Like that song, as soon as I heard it, my associations with that song is the game Fallout 3, which, you know, I have a lot of nostalgia for, but was like a mixed bag when you go back and look at it. But I still enjoy the game. So kind of setting the tone, very felt like the opening of season 1 of Picard, actually, where they had the song Blue Skies playing at that, evoking Data. So very clearly sort of pulling from that, liked that opening. And then we get Beverly Crusher on a ship popping out of nowhere. And oh my gosh, it was so cool to see Gates McFadden. But what I loved most about her appearance here is that she starts kicking ass right off the bat. Like, hot damn. Gates McFadden has always talked about, and this was sort of a big discussion with the Next Generation of the show. Like, I love Gates McFadden, I love Marina Sirtis, I love the women characters on the Next Generation. But for them especially, they were always like caregiver roles. Like, she was a doctor, she always had to be taking care of people. So to see Beverly Crusher be like, nah, I'm taking a gun and starting to shoot people, knocking everyone down, was just so badass and awesome. At one point, I think she gets like an energy shotgun, which very much reminded me of the Star Trek Voyager Elite Force video games. You remember those back in the day? They had like nonsense like Starfleet guns that you could get in that game. And so she has like a reloading energy shotgun, which makes no sense. It makes no sense, but I was loving it. It was like, damn, Beverly got like hardcore, hot damn. And she's fighting these like weird people with masks, like very like Court of Owlsy Batman look to them, which I liked the design, but very like cannon fodder type of enemies. And there was someone on the ship that she sort of locked in a room who was yelling to help her, who we see at the end of the episode, so I'll come back to him. And we also get to see some nostalgia stuff like Jack Crusher, like signs on the table, and like Picard's sort of best of both worlds opening. So I'm very curious if the fact that we got to see Picard's best of both worlds mission log, because that mission log you hear the opening was from that episode, the first sort of major episode with the Borg, though we got them in iBorg first. I'm wondering if that is going to be a sign that maybe the Borg are going to be a big part of the season. We'll have to wait and see. So all of that was great. A great opening for the show to say like, hey, this, you're getting to see your characters from Next Generation, but they are very different. They have moved on. They have grown in different ways. And we see that very clearly with Beverly Crusher just shooting shit. Then from there, we get into the opening credits, which they very much did away with the Star Trekian style opening credits, at least in the first half of the show, because we just get a very simple, like, Star Trek Picard, bum-ba-bum, like, Next Generation theme, going into the Star Trek Picard theme, and then we get sort of part one, the Next Generation, like, very simple, again, evoking the TOS style movies with that sort of look and feel of them. So I was like, here for it. I'm with this tone. Even though I miss, I do, like, as much as people give shit to the Star Trek Picard theme song, I do like a good, like, evoking theme song, but we get one at the end of the episode, so I'm okay with it. From there, we then open up on a painting of, a beautiful painting of the Enterprise D, and Picard saying, it wasn't my first, but it was my favorite, because, you know, you gotta have your favorite lover, apparently, but yeah, of course, he loves the Enterprise D most, and it was interesting to see this whole discussion that he has with Laris, and sort of building on the Picard-Laris relationship, which I'll talk a bit, where we ended in Season 2 with them, in just a moment, but their discussion was very much like Picard being like, I don't want to be a person stuck in the past, as he's surrounded by all these relics. He has the Resican flute, he has some Bajoran awards that he has the Kirsta Nest Cone, which is the thing that he like threw to the side in Generations, but apparently was something really meaningful to him. So I loved all those little knickknacks that he had around. But it was an interesting discussion because he's like, look, I don't want to be defined by the past. And Lara said, it's okay to pull from the past to find who you are, especially at your age. And so it was this interesting conversation that I think the show is sort of like metatextually having around like nostalgia. And like, are you able to pull from like nostalgia of the past without it like overriding you, not wanting to get too drawn into it, while also still learning from it and sort of being able to pull from it to define who you are today. And I think that that's an interesting metatextual commentary, because one of the big problems that I think a lot of people have with not just Star Trek Picard, but a lot of like big franchise shows nowadays is this sort of like nostalgia driven storytelling. It's like, oh look, we're going to reference this, we're going to pull this character, there's this legacy character back. And the fact that this season is very much sold on that, like, oh, we're going to get all your favorite Next Generation faves back. I think it's interesting to see the show sort of like grappling with that in this conversation between Laris and Picard. It seems very self-aware of this push and pull of nostalgia, legacy style storytelling, and how you can move something forward while still drawing from the past. And so I'm very hopeful if that's the ethos that the show is going for, about like, we can do these things from the past, but still aim to constantly look forward and not past driven. I think it's a tightrope to walk, but I think it'll be an interesting thing if that's the statement that the show is making with this season. So curious on that. And I think that that is shown very much so by the fact that we don't get a lot of like past TNG characters in this episode at all. We get Riker, who's already appeared in the season, so we're not like, I know I'm always thirsty for more Riker, but we're not like being like, oh, I want to see Riker again, because we want to see these other characters we haven't touched back with. So the fact that we only get Beverly and Riker in this episode, I think is really nice to sort of like showing restraint on the nostalgia stuff in this episode so far. So that is all really cool. But then we get the call to action for Picard as he finds his little communicator badge that is being sent a message by Beverly. He figures out how to decode it, all that sort of thing. Some nice little references in there. But it leads to this interesting conversation between Laris and Picard, where Laris sort of says, Picard, go off, go save her, and go and do that journey. And I'm just sitting here being like, oh, poor Laris. For another season, for a third season in a row, she's getting left behind while Picard goes on his adventure. And you know, I understand, I like the rest of this episode, but it's just me being here like, poor Laris, poor girl, just constantly, like, every season she's just been like, well, Picard's gonna go off and do some stuff, and I guess I'll just sit around here, which is just funny considering at the end of season 2, they like, we're gonna start a relationship together. So I guess that is a little bit disappointing to just constantly see Laris, who's a character back in season 1 of Picard that I was really interested in, just I guess get cast aside. So hopefully she will come back, but given precedent in previous Picard seasons, probably sadly not the case. So I guess that's a bit of a disappointment on my end, of just, yet again, Laris getting a little bit of the short shrift as a character, despite her being really interesting. So bit disappointing there. But she does say, like, come and find me. We'll have a nice romantic dinner after your adventure's over. So I'm sure that'll be, like, towards the end of the season bits, if she does come back in a sort of romantic way. But then we cut over to the 10 Forward bar, Guinan's bar from season 2, and I'm just sitting here being like, I love that bar, it's a great set, but I'm just being like, well, it's clearly the producers being like, we paid for this bar, we're going to ring every single second we can get on screen with this bar, because we paid for it, damn it. So I just thought that was funny, but going to Guinan's bar, it's a great set, it's cool, and we get to see some models of the Enterprise D, and there's a whole bunch of them there, and I just have to, I was watching that, I was going, R.I.P. Eagle Moss. Poor Eagle Moss. For those of you who don't know, Eagle Moss is the company that used to make all these really amazing Star Trek ship models. I have a whole bunch of them on my shelf over there. Like, if there's a Star Trek ship model you've seen on my shelf over there, it's probably from Eagle Moss. But unfortunately, they, I forget exactly, but like had business troubles, went out of business or something like that, and so they're no longer selling the models. So I was just watching these models that are clearly like the Eagle Moss novels and models, and I'm like, oh, poor Eagle Moss. Sorry to see you go. I also like the joke about like no one wants the Enterprise D because they're the fat ones, and I'm like, yeah, the top heavy models. Who wants a top heavy model? Just go boom. Don't hate on me. The Enterprise D is the one that I always thought was the silliest looking of the stars. I know people have a lot of nostalgia for it. I always thought they were funny looking. And so I like that being a joke within the show itself. But we get a cool little scene between Riker and Picard as they sort of work out what Beverly's message meant, and Riker's able to figure out where the message is actually indicating them going. And I like just seeing Picard and Riker just working together on a mission, like getting stuff down, like just getting to the nitty gritty. That was really, really cool. But we do, within that conversation, get a few interesting notes here. We get the reference to Frontier Day, which is apparently like this big pomp and circumstance day for Starfleet coming up, which the fact that it gets referenced a whole bunch within this episode has me being like, that's probably going to be a set piece later on in the season, so curious to see where they're heading with that. We also get reference that Beverly has cut everyone off. No one's really seen her in 20 years, which has me interested to see what was going on with Beverly. She's just like, I'm gonna go out and be a badass in space. Deal with it. Peace. So it was just kind of funny to see where they might be heading with that storyline with her. And then also there's a little evocation of Riker saying like, oh yeah, Deanna and Kestra, his daughter, who we saw back in season 1, they don't want to see him anymore, or they could use a little bit of a break from me, is what he says, which is like, interesting. Curious to see what's going on between Riker and the rest of his family, because they seem to be in a good place at the end of that season. So I'm curious to see where that means they are now. Also, side note, I do hope we get to see more of Kestra. I know we'll get to see more Deanna, but Kestra I adored in season 1. Probably won't, considering the actor probably aged up. But I really enjoyed Kestra in season 1. She was one of the elements of that season that I really loved. So hopefully we'll get to see her. I'm guessing probably not. From there, we go to the planet Metalis, which very clearly is reference to showrunner Terry Metalis. He named a planet after himself. You egotistical jerk, you. You're an egotistical jerk if you're watching this. Just know that. That's what I think of you for naming this. Apparently, I just called it in my notes, Rave Blade Runner planet. I love the look, but I was just like, if it was basically as if everyone in Blade Runner was at a rave, is what this planet looks like to me. But we get to see Rafi on this planet, and she is doing undercover Starfleet stuff. I was really worried at first, being like, oh, is she doing drugs? Is she like sort of off the lam, you know? But no, she's off the lam. You know what I meant. She's like doing drugs and sort of falling out of Starfleet. But no, she's working for Starfleet Intelligence and sort of working in the CD Underground, which is, I like seeing her there because that's what she was good at and what we know that she does well in Starfleet. Like that was her sort of purview way back in season 1. So seeing her doing undercover work is really, really cool. But it's very clear clear that she's struggling a little bit because she has fallen. She did use drugs a lot, and so that's sort of something that she struggles with a little bit. And I like that element of her character coming back from season 1. That was something that kind of got dropped in season 2 of Star Trek Picard. Rafi, I like Michelle Hurd, and Rafi's a great character, but in season 2 they kind of just forgot that whole element of her character. So I like it coming back here and being like something that she's struggling with but not fallen into. I thought that was a great balance. My only concern with Rafi's storyline and where we see her sort of investigating stuff here and finding out stuff about the Red Lady, apparently, which is sort of a big hint that we'll see towards the end of the episode. My only concern, though, is she's not with Seven. And we see later on Seven's in a very different place, and it tells me that they chose not to be together with each other. Either they're like still in a relationship, because at the end of season 2 we kind of saw them together, so either they're in a relationship and just like doing distant things, or they kind of broke it off. And if they broke it off, I will say I would be a bit disappointed, because, you know, we've been very on and off with Seven and Rafi. They were kind of on at the end of season 1. Then we get in the middle of season 1 to this audio drama that shows that they're together. If you listen to that audio drama, it's great. But then in season 2, they're broken up again. And then they get together at the end of season 2. And then season 3, they're not together again. And that is, as a queer, reviewer and a Trekkie, it is frustrating to see queer characters constantly being like, oh, we're in a relationship, we're in a relationship, we're not, and kind of have that back and forth with them. It kind of feels like playing with our heartstrings a little bit, and it is a little bit frustrating, to be very honest. And I could see the argument about being like, look, this is where we want these characters to be for their own stories, and I could honestly also buy if we get a scene later on with the characters being like, hey, we just wanted to go our separate ways, and that feels very honest and true. That happens in real life, but it is also a little bit of frustrating. So that's like kind of balancing as a queer audience member, that sort of balance. It's not something I'm hating or think is awful, but it's just one of those like, just a frustrating element to constantly like toy with that relationship and never really do anything worthwhile with it. Just sort of like, they're in one, they're not, as queer characters. So a little bit of a frustration there, but maybe they'll end up doing something with it. It's just sort of a thought that I have at this moment of like, I like where the characters are at individually, but it is a bit frustrating to see that. But from there, though, we do get Rafi talking to her handler. She sort of has these text things on screen. And one thing that I noticed, the word warrior is used. The handler says, oh, you're a warrior, which has me being like, that Worf? Was that Worf? Was Silver Fox Worf hiding on the other side of those words? I see you, Worf. You use that word warrior, and I'm like, I see you. You have a very limited vocabulary. I love you, but you use warrior a lot. I think it's Worf. We also see in that scene that Rafi's like really struggling with being unmoored at the moment, so interesting spot for her to be at. But then we cut over to what I joked about earlier, the sexy starbase scene. We get to see a beautiful starbase, and like, oh yeah, show me that starbase. Getting aggressive here. But then we go into the, in there, we get to see the Titan, which, you know, some people don't like the Titan look because it looks very like USS Enterprise-y from the original series. I get that. I think it looked kind of nice. But it did get like the handsome lady moment, like, oh yeah, look at this starship porn. I was very pleased. But I like Riker and Picard sort of playing with each other. Riker being like, you enjoying this? Give me your your stare. It's just great back and forth and banter, and I like that this season has had time for fun. The past like other Star Trek seasons, especially in Star Trek Picard, we're always very like dour in a lot of ways. There's some moments of fun, like Stardust City Rag in season 1 of Picard, but it was very dour. And so to see them be kind of playful with each other was really nice. And the fact that they're sort of like gonna try and sneak on this ship and sort of commandeer and like get the Captain Shaw to sort of redirect it to where they need to go and sort of pretend that they're doing this for Frontier Day. But then they appear on the ship, and they meet the first officer, who is 7 of 9. And I'm like, hell yeah, I love seeing 7 of 9 finally get to be in Starfleet. But one thing that we get to see happen here, she says, well, Shaw prefers that I use the name Annika Hansen, uses my human name. And I know this was a big controversy online with, at least in my circles, of people being like, when they saw this in the trailers, like, oh, is that dead naming 7 of 9? For those of you who don't know, for trans characters, for trans people in real life, using our name that was not the one that we were assigned at birth, but not the ones that we wish to use anymore after transition or before transition, is called dead naming, and it can be very rude and mean and even mental health damaging if done a lot and with intention to hurt. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, is this the show dead naming her? But as we see, I actually like the arc of where they're going with this, because she says Captain Shaw prefers Annika Hansen, not I prefer. And so it wasn't like Annika Hansen, it wasn't Seven sort of denying her Borg part of herself, especially since we saw even last season where Seven like accepted the Borg as part of who she is and not trying to deny it, accepting that element of who she's become, and Seven is who she is. But I like that it's Shaw says that, and we'll talk about that more in a second. So I know this was a controversy, but I will address it in a second because I actually liked this arc we see in this episode. I also like the fact that Picard and Riker sort of playing with the people's like, oh, put your uniform on straight, like just like living it up a little bit. Then they get to the bridge, and I love it. We get to meet Geordi's daughter, who's just beaming at Riker and Picard. He's like, oh my god, they're my uncles. They're like my uncles from my childhood. And they're like, she's just beaming at them, and it's adorable. And I love Riker being such a dad. He is being such a dad at that moment and embarrassing her. It's like, oh, you're Crash Geordi. And it's just like, oh my god, why are you doing this in front of all my friends? It's just kind of hilarious. It was such a dad moment for Riker, and Jonathan Frakes always brings the dad energy, so that was lovely. And then we get Seven taking them out, which is cool to see Seven taking the captain's chair for a hot minute there. But then from there, we go to meet Captain Shaw at his dinner that he had planned for Riker and Picard. And oh boy, was this probably my favorite scene of the episode, because every line out of Shaw's mouth just shows his contempt and rudeness towards Riker and Picard. It's a fine line to walk, because rude characters can come across, especially the characters that we like. Like, we like Riker and Picard, and the fact that he's rude to them could mean, like, we instantly be like, fuck this guy, I hate him. And I don't like him. Like, Shaw's an asshole, he's a dick. But the actor, I wrote his name down, Ed Spleers, and apologies if I say his name wrong, but he has this, like, weird kind of fun charm, like asshole-ish charm to him that I'm like, I hate you, you're a dick, but you're kind of a fun dick. You're like a dick that I kind of enjoy watching. How many times can I say that I enjoy watching Dick in this review? Anywho, but he was kind of a very fun asshole to watch. Like, they walked that line very well of like having him be a fun asshole. But there were several dynamics in the scene that I really loved as it went along. Like, number one, he's not entirely wrong. Like, he is an asshole, but he kind of has this, like, feeling of Jellicoe from The Next Generation, where he's like, I run a tight ship, I follow the rules, I do exactly what I want, we have this, we make everything run exactly as it should. And I'm very detail-oriented in that, and so I'm not going to take the ship off and do whatever you want. You guys technically aren't my officers, you're retired, it's all those things, so I'm going to just do the things I'm supposed to do. And he's a dick about it, but I understand where he's coming from. So there's like that Jellicoe feel to this character that I like very much enjoy.
Commander, as first officer, it is my responsibility to point out any actions that may be mistakes by a commanding officer, sir.
Then maybe it's time you found other responsibilities. You're relieved.
I'm not siding with him. He's an asshole. But, you know, kind of like that, like, even like a slightly more turned up asshole version of Jellicoe, which I thought was an interesting element there. Another couple dynamics is, though, I like that Picard and Riker were trying to butter him up during the scene. Like, they're like, we'll take all these insults on the chin. We'll take it on the chin because we need him to do what we need him to do. So they sort of like have that element. And then when they realize he's not going to do what they want to do, they very much like, what the hell? And I love that Seven has to sit there and be absolutely quiet. She's his first officer. So, and also she doesn't know what's going on. So she just has to kind of sit there and listen. She can't stand up for anybody. She just has to kind of sit there because she's the lowest ranking person at that table. And you get to see, especially in contrast to something like Strange New Worlds, where we got to see like Pike's very open dinners in that show, Captain Pike there. This one's, you just see this as just an uncomfortable feeling between these two characters that work on this ship together. Shaw does not foster that open atmosphere at all. And so Seven just staying quiet the whole time was just an interesting element for her. And there's a moment here where Shaw calls out Picard being an ex-Borg, and he seems to have very much resentment at that, which has me wondering if he has like some history with Picard being Locutus. But even without that, it just sort of has me being like, well, if that's how he constantly like just does microaggressions against Picard for being an ex-Borg, he probably does that all the time to Seven, which is why she uses the name Annika Hansen. He has microaggressed and kind of probably bullied her and made her feel bad for her part of her identity and made her have to use her dead name. And I think that is as a trans person, I can very much relate to that. I know a lot of trans people who relate to that, who feel like we have to hide elements of who we are, our identity, and change our names for the people around us who are refusing to accept us as our full selves. So that is why I'm like, oh, this show is using Seven's experience here under Shaw as a sort of dead naming metaphor that's not one for one with the trans community, but very much evokes that same feeling of someone not seeing your full self and actually actively having a prejudice against your full self, which I thought was really, really cool. And I love that later on, at the end of the episode, Picard tells Seven, he says, Captain Seven, and calls her Seven, as he acknowledges that he sees the real her. He's not going to call her Annika. He's going to call her Seven, because that's who she is, and he sees her, and he's not going to fall into what Shaw wants. And so I love that. That was the full arc of this, and I'm like, okay, I love it, and I see it, because it is Picard recognizing that Seven is who she is. And I thought that was a really just beautiful, just subtle story going on in the background of this episode. Just took like 3 little beats, but just works. And I thought, oh, they get it. The detail of this is really amazing. And I thought that it was paid off really beautifully. And we'll see if that comes up more in the rest of the season. From there, though, we get Riker and Picard in bunk beds, which is adorable. Just seeing Riker and Picard in bunk beds. I was like, oh, I didn't know I needed that. That's adorable. But then Picard again talking about how he hasn't seen Beverly in 20 years and everyone's cut her off. So just sort of that mystery going on there. But then Seven calls them up to the bridge and she says, look, what the hell is going on? I like Seven calling them out on this because, like, look, I'm your friend. You need to tell me what the hell is going on. And I like that before she had even done this, she had already taken them where they needed to go. She's like, I'm going to call them out on their BS, but I'm still going to help them because I know this is what they need and I trust them. So it was a good moment. She calls them out on their crap, but still does what they need. And I thought that was a really great moment between them. And that's, again, why Picard calls her Seven, which I really loved. I also loved Seven's arc here that we're starting her off in this season where she says, you know, I don't feel if I fit in Starfleet because I don't know if I can lead. I don't know if I can inspire leadership. And that feels like a great thing for Seven because she's always been competent. But as we saw back in all the way back in Voyager, and even in the first few seasons of Picard, while she has always wanted community, she's never been great at communicating or inspiring and kind of been isolated as a result of that. Like, she wants people around her because she comes from the Borg, and she wants that sort of community. But she doesn't know how to really effectively lead. Something that she always struggled with communicating and inspiring others. So I like that this is her arc in this season. I think that feels like a great place for her to begin this season, and it feels like it builds off of her character and where we've seen her be these past few years and going all the way back to Voyager. So I love that as a starting place for her arc, is like being unsure if she can inspire. But from there, we cut back to Rafi, who discovers who the Red Lady is. And the Red Lady is a statue of the captain of the Enterprise C from the episode Yesterday's Enterprise at this, Starfleet training headquarters. And by the way, that bust of the captain reminded me of the bust of Janeway that exists in real life. There's a famous, bust of Catherine Janeway in the real life that a small town, I forget which state it was in, but a small town sort of put up of her, which I thought was cool. So it made me think of that. But anyway, she goes there, and it's like, oh no, now we're thinking with portals. Because we have a huge portal hole open up, drop the whole building, and then drop the building on the rest of the frickin' city. Like, holy shit. Like, I don't know how I feel about, end of the world stakes and weapons of mass destruction in Star Trek, so I'm a little hesitant on, we're dealing with another, mass weapon scenario. So, a bit frustrating on that element, that we're already starting off the end of the universe stakes of things. That being said, this is the one with the more clever ones that I've seen. Portal technology on that grand a scale, holy shit, is that kind of cool. So, I'm not here for grand mass destruction in my Star Trek shows much anymore. I've kind of become inured to that ever since the J.J. Abrams Star Trek stuff, and it's been a little bit overused. But this is on the cooler end of that, so I'll give them that. And it is very devastating to see, and Rafi clearly is going to have some feelings about that and failing to save those people, even though it wasn't her fault. But she's probably clearly going to put that weight on her shoulders. But then, to wrap out the episode, we have Picard and Riker heading to Beverly's ship and just sort of having fun in the nebula there. But then they get on the ship, and I love the fact that they sort of discover Beverly's stuff, and there's this music playing. Picard's like, oh yeah, I made that, it's this thing of classic music that I made for Beverly. And I'm like, Picard, did you make Beverly a mixtape? Did you make Beverly a mixtape like a little teenage boy? That's adorable. I love that. I love that Picard made Beverly a little mixtape. That's cute as all hell. But they also find remnants of the battle, and clearly something happened. And then they find Beverly's body. She's healing in this pod, very much in her bacta tank. So she's healing. And then they meet this guy with a British accent, which is interesting because Beverly doesn't have a British accent, but we learned that he is Beverly's child. So I'm like, why does he have a British accent? And I think they're meant to be evoking that he might be Picard's son, is the possibility here, I think is what we're hinting at. But it is weird that he has a British accent and Beverly does not. So I thought that's kind of funny. But anyways, yeah, we meet this boy who seems to be Beverly's son. And I'm curious to see what more they want from him, because he just sort of said they're on the run from these people who keep following them. And then we get the enemy showing up, and it's this cool looking ship who, from the trailers, we know that this is called the Shrike, is this ship that's showing up. And then it growls at them, which I always love it when a good spaceship growls in the vacuum of space. I know it's ridiculous. That's not a Star Trek Picard thing. Every space show, big budget space show does some version of like the growly ship. I think the only one that doesn't is like The Expanse does that well. But it's just like ships growling in space, always fun. But creepy looking ship, and clearly the bad guys of the season have arrived, probably played by Amanda Plummer, who we know is going to be the villain of the season. So that's how we end the episode, with those stakes high, and it is very exciting. So yeah, like I said, I loved this episode. While there are some things here that have me a little bit hesitant, like again, we have this new young character. I'm like, that might be a jump the shark kind of thing. Like, oh look, a surprise character's child that you've never met before. We'll sort of see where that ultimately goes. And then there are things that I'm more neutral on, but I'm sort of like on, like such as Seven and Rafi not like following through on that storyline that we've been going on with that relationship. On the whole, though, this episode was a very strong premiere. I love the interplay between Riker and Picard. I love the fun that this is able to have, but the sort of sense of weight that was going on here. The mystery has been set up fairly interesting, but a little bit mystery boxy. And, you know, very clearly evoking nostalgia, but not wanting to go too far. Like we did, it would have been very easy in this premiere to be like, oh, Worf shows up, Geordi shows up, Data shows up, or Lore shows up, or whoever it's going to be. But we know we only get Beverly and Riker, and it's keeping that very clean. So yeah, it's you know, I'm cautious. It still could go very awry, because Picard has had strong starts and as a series and fallen off very quickly. But a cautiously optimistic season premiere. So that's my thoughts on the season premiere so far. What do you think? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts down below, everybody. And I will see you all next week for the next episode of Star Trek Picard. I'm very excited.